It's 8 in the morning and you've already asked your child 5 times to put on their shoes. Your voice gets louder with each request. The clock is ticking. You're late for school, late for work, and your child is sitting on the floor, arms crossed, staring at you with that look of absolute defiance. You feel your chest tighten. You know what's coming next. The negotiation will turn into an argument, the argument will turn into tears, and somehow you'll both end up exhausted before the day has even started. Every parent knows this scene. Every parent has lived it. But what if there was a way to break this cycle that didn't involve raising your voice, offering bribes, or feeling like you failed before breakfast even happens? What if the solution was so simple that it feels almost too quiet to be effective? In Korea, there's an approach to parenting that operates on a principle most Western parents overlook entirely. It's not about control. It's not about rewards or consequences. It's about something far more fundamental to how children actually process instructions and decide whether to cooperate. This method doesn't rely on your child's mood, your energy level, or how much time you have. It works in 60 seconds or less, and once you understand why it works, you'll see that everything you've been taught about getting children to listen has been built on a misunderstanding of what children actually need in order to follow through. The problem isn't that your child is defiant. The problem is that we've been taught to give instructions in a way that creates internal resistance before the child even has a chance to cooperate. When you tell a child what to do, their brain doesn't just hear the instruction. It hears the power dynamic. It feels the pressure. And if the child is already in a state of emotional arousal, which most children are in the morning rush or during transitions, that pressure activates their nervous system in a way that makes cooperation nearly impossible. This is why the same instruction that worked yesterday fails today. This is why calm, reasonable parents find themselves yelling. Because we're trying to push through resistance instead of dissolving it before it forms. Korean parenting culture has long understood something that Western developmental psychology is only now beginning to articulate clearly. Children don't resist instructions because they want to be difficult. They resist when the instruction feels like it's being imposed on them from the outside, disconnected from their own sense of agency and timing. The Korean concept that addresses this is called nunchi, which roughly translates to the ability to read a situation and respond with emotional attunement before conflict arises. But in the context of parent-child interactions, it manifests as a specific communication pattern that changes everything about how instructions are received. Instead of telling a child what to do, you invite them into the action with you. Instead of creating a separation between the one who commands and the one who obeys, you create a shared moment where cooperation feels natural. The technique is disarmingly simple. When you need your child to do something, you don't say, "Put on your shoes." You say, "Let's put on our shoes," and you sit down next to them and start putting on your own shoes. Or if you don't need shoes, you physically lower yourself to their level and you engage in the action as if you're doing it together, even if your role is simply to be present. The instruction becomes an invitation. The demand becomes a moment of connection. This might sound too simple to be effective, but the neuroscience behind it is profound. When a child hears, "You need to do this," their brain categorizes the interaction as a potential threat to autonomy. The prefrontal cortex, which handles decision-making and impulse control, is still developing in children. It's fragile. It doesn't have the capacity to override emotional responses the way an adult brain does. So when a child feels pressured, even by a perfectly reasonable request, the amygdala fires. The body goes into a low-level stress response. And in that state, cooperation becomes neurologically difficult. The child isn't choosing to be defiant. Their brain is protecting them from what it perceives as a loss of control. But when you say, "Let's do this together," something completely different happens. The instruction is no longer a threat. It's an invitation into a shared experience. The child's mirror neurons activate. These are the neurons that allow us to empathize, to mimic, to feel connected to others. When they see you sitting down to put on your shoes, their brain doesn't have to fight against the instruction. It simply mirrors what it sees. The resistance dissolves because there's nothing to resist. You're not asking them to do something alone. You're doing it with them. This is why Korean parents often appear calm in situations where Western parents are escalating. It's not that their children are more obedient. It's that they've structured the interaction in a way that removes the conditions for conflict. The child doesn't feel controlled. The parent doesn't feel ignored. And the task gets done without either person feeling diminished. The method works because it aligns with how children are wired to learn and cooperate, which is through observation, connection, and shared action, not through isolated commands. Now, if you're thinking this sounds too slow for real life, consider what actually happens when you try to force compliance. You ask once. The child ignores you. You ask again, louder. The child resists. You threaten a consequence. The child either complies resentfully or melts down completely. Even when it works, you've spent 5 minutes in a battle that leaves everyone feeling worse. The "let's do this together" approach takes 30 seconds. You sit down, you start the action, the child mirrors you, and it's done. The time you think you're saving by barking orders is actually being consumed by the conflict those orders create. There's also a deeper layer to this method that goes beyond simple compliance. When you consistently invite your child into actions instead of commanding them, you're teaching them something essential about how relationships work. You're teaching them that cooperation doesn't mean submission. You're teaching them that they can maintain their sense of self while still being part of a team. And you're teaching them that adults are people they can trust to be with them, not people who are always trying to manage them from a distance. These lessons shape how they'll approach authority, collaboration, and self-regulation for the rest of their lives. But here's where most parents get stuck. They try this once, and if the child doesn't immediately respond, they assume it doesn't work and they revert back to commands. The method requires consistency, not because children are slow to learn, but because they need to unlearn the defensive patterns that have already formed. If your child is used to instructions being the start of a power struggle, they'll initially be confused when you change the pattern. They might test it. They might still resist the first few times. This doesn't mean the method failed. It means you're in the transition phase where the old neural pathways are still firing, but new ones are starting to form. The key is to stay calm and repeat the invitation without frustration. Sit down next to them. Start putting on your shoes. If they don't move, you can say quietly, "I'm putting mine on now. You can put yours on when you're ready." Then you wait. You don't hover. You don't lecture. You just create the space for them to join you. Most children will start moving within 60 seconds once they realize you're not going to fight them. And if they don't, you can gently place their shoes near them and continue with your own actions. The absence of pressure is what creates the movement. This approach also transforms bedtime, mealtime, and cleanup time, which are the other major battlegrounds of early parenting. When it's time to clean up toys, instead of saying, "Clean up your toys now," you say, "Let's clean up together," and you start picking up toys yourself. You don't do all the work for them, but you join the process. The child sees you engaged in the action, and their natural instinct to participate kicks in. It's the same principle that makes children want to help with cooking, folding laundry, or washing the car. They're not motivated by the task itself. They're motivated by the connection and the sense of being included in something meaningful. At bedtime, instead of saying, "Go brush your teeth," you say, "Let's go brush our teeth," and you walk with them to the bathroom. You pick up your own toothbrush. You make it a ritual you do together, even if you've already brushed your teeth. The few seconds you spend doing this will save you the 20 minutes you would have spent arguing, reminding, and eventually dragging them to the bathroom. The same goes for getting dressed, leaving the park, or turning off the TV. The instruction becomes an event you're both part of, rather than a demand they have to meet alone. Now, there's a cultural context to this that's worth understanding. In many East Asian parenting traditions, there's less emphasis on individual independence and more emphasis on relational harmony. Children are raised with the understanding that they exist within a network of relationships, and that cooperation is how those relationships stay healthy. This doesn't mean children are taught to be passive. It means they're taught that their actions affect others, and that being considerate is a strength, not a limitation. The "let's do this together" method is an embodiment of that philosophy. It teaches the child that their cooperation matters, not because they'll be punished if they don't comply, but because their participation is part of how the family functions as a unit. Western parenting, by contrast, often prioritizes independence and self-direction, which are valuable qualities, but sometimes at the expense of teaching children how to cooperate without feeling like they're losing themselves. The result is children who feel like every instruction is a test of their autonomy, and parents who feel like they're constantly battling for control. The Korean method offers a middle path. It respects the child's need for agency while still getting things done. It doesn't sacrifice connection for compliance, and it doesn't sacrifice compliance for connection. It integrates both. There's also something important to understand about what this method is not. It's not permissive parenting. You're not letting the child decide whether or not to follow through. You're creating the conditions that make following through feel natural. You're still the parent. You're still setting the boundary. But you're doing it in a way that doesn't trigger defensiveness. And that distinction matters because many parents fear that if they stop being forceful, their children will stop listening altogether. But the opposite is true. Children listen more when they feel connected. They cooperate more when the request doesn't feel like a threat. And they develop better self-regulation when they're included in the process rather than forced through it. One of the most profound shifts that happens when parents start using this method is that they stop feeling like enforcers and start feeling like guides. The exhaustion that comes from constantly having to push, remind, and manage begins to lift. Because you're no longer in a battle. You're in a partnership. And even though your child is small and still learning, they can feel the difference. They can feel that you're with them, not against them. And that feeling is what makes them want to cooperate, not because they have to, but because it feels better than resisting. There's also a long-term benefit that doesn't become obvious until years later. Children who grow up with this kind of connected guidance develop a different relationship with authority figures. They don't see adults as people to outwit or rebel against. They see them as people to collaborate with. This doesn't mean they become passive or compliant in unhealthy ways. It means they learn to assess situations, read social cues, and respond with flexibility rather than rigidity. These are the skills that will help them navigate school, friendships, and eventually the workplace. And it all starts with how you ask them to put on their shoes when they're 3 years old. But perhaps the most important thing this method teaches is emotional regulation. When you stay calm and invite your child into action instead of demanding it, you're modeling what it looks like to handle frustration without escalating. You're showing them that it's possible to have a need and express it without becoming aggressive or manipulative. You're teaching them that other people's feelings and needs matter, and that cooperation is how we take care of each other. These are lessons that can't be taught through lectures or consequences. They have to be lived. And the "let's do this together" method creates hundreds of small moments every week where those lessons are reinforced. Now, if you're a parent who has spent years using commands and consequences, this shift might feel awkward at first. You might feel like you're not being authoritative enough. You might worry that your child will sense the change and take advantage of it. But children don't take advantage of connection. They take advantage of inconsistency. If you commit to this approach and use it consistently, your child will adapt. They'll learn that instructions are no longer the beginning of a fight. They're the beginning of a shared action. And once that new pattern is established, cooperation becomes the default, not the exception. The truth is, most parents don't want to yell. They don't want to feel like they're constantly at odds with their children. They want connection. They want ease. They want to feel like they're doing this parenting thing in a way that feels good for everyone involved. But they've been told that the way to get children to listen is through firmness, consequences, and a kind of emotional distance that's supposed to establish respect. And while boundaries are important, respect doesn't come from fear or force. It comes from being seen, being valued, and being trusted. When you invite your child into action instead of commanding them, you're giving them all three. This isn't about being perfect. There will still be hard days. There will still be moments when you're late and stressed and you don't have the bandwidth to sit down and put on your shoes together. But even in those moments, the tone you've established through consistent use of this method will carry you. Your child will have learned that cooperation is safe. They'll have learned that you're someone who includes them rather than controls them. And that foundation will hold even when things get chaotic. The Korean approach to guiding children isn't about imposing a foreign philosophy onto your family. It's about recognizing a universal truth that many cultures have understood in different ways. Children are relational beings. They learn through connection. They cooperate when they feel safe. And the fastest way to get them to do what you need them to do is to stop treating the instruction as a battle and start treating it as an invitation. It's not softer. It's smarter. It's not permissive. It's effective. And it's something you can start using today, right now, the next time you need your child to do something and you feel that familiar tension rising. Your child doesn't need you to be louder. They need you to be closer. They don't need more consequences. They need more connection. And the remarkable thing is that when you shift from commanding to inviting, you'll find that the thing you've been fighting for, cooperation, was always available. It was just hidden under layers of pressure and resistance that you didn't realize you were creating. The moment you remove that pressure, the cooperation emerges naturally. Because deep down, children want to be part of what you're doing. They want to feel included. They want to move with you, not against you. All you have to do is invite them in.